Hey, you guys, it's Britt. Tonight we're here to react to the podcast episode that Gypsy Rose did with Kailyn Lowery. I mentioned this briefly in a recent video, and when I saw the actual interview, there were so many things that Gypsy said that were just absolutely ridiculous. So we're going to do a good old-fashioned reaction. This will be a long one because the podcast was about an hour long. And we're just going to start at the top. So if you're interested, please keep watching. All right, you guys. So at the top, I would like to acknowledge that I have seen the comments. I've seen people reacting to this, and I agree that Gypsy does not look like she's 8 months pregnant and literally less than a month from giving birth, but we're just playing the waiting game on that one. But I did want to acknowledge it at the top of the video. So hold on to your britches. We're going to get into it. Let's start at the beginning.
All right, Gypsy, thank you for coming on the Barely Famous podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I read your book cover to cover in a couple hours.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk about it. I run an online book club, so this was right up my alley.
Oh, perfect.
Two things real quick. Kailyn says that she read the book in a couple of hours. Fine, whatever. She did not educate herself on this case. She did not check facts. She did not educate herself on what she was walking into with this, because she allows Gypsy Rose to use her podcast as another outlet to continue to spread egregious lies about Nick, Dee Dee, her other family members, and that needs to be called out. The other thing, I think that it's just hilarious that on her laptop she literally has a sticker that says killer, but either way, let's continue.
Have been in the headlines for probably 10 years now. Does that sound about right?
About right, yeah.
Why now? Why are we writing a book now? Is there a reason?
Well, it's not exactly.
Because she can make money off of it now, because she's out of prison. If she published this while she was still in prison, she would not have been able to collect the money that comes along with it. That's why now. Use your noggin.
Exactly right now. I've been working on it for about 3 years.
Okay.
The portion that was the final pieces was editing, and that came after I got released.
Okay. So it's been a work in progress for a long time.
It has.
And there was some things in the book that I was surprised to read, because, you know, we hear all kinds of things in the media and people come up with their own theories, but was writing this and sort of going through this entire process for you cathartic and sort of like therapy for you?
It was challenging.
There were things that you hadn't heard about, because Gypsy Rose used this as an opportunity to sprinkle in new lies and new ways to make the public feel bad for her, and more just, you know, all of the half-truths. We know her blueprint now, and Kailyn is too dumb to see it.
At times, because I had to kind of ask for information from family members, because like I know my side of things, but I don't know the full picture. So I had
Sure.
to talk to family, I had to talk to, friends, to get a lot of information that I didn't know about.
Right. So do you ever talk about your relationship and where they stand today with?
She must have only been asking Christy and her father for information, because later in this interview she goes on to say that she doesn't talk to Dee Dee's side of the family. Half of them are unfortunately passed away now, and the surviving ones don't interact with Gypsy. So by asking family, you're asking a very biased part of your family, which is Christy and Rod.
Claude or Laura? Do you talk about that at all?
Laura has passed away. She
Got it.
passed away a few years ago. I don't speak with Claude. We live like literally one town apart. But I haven't run into him since I was actually little. So
Do you know how he feels about the book?
I honestly don't know how he feels about the book. He's in his 80s, so I'm not really even sure if he even knows about the book.
Okay. I mean, He doesn't really need to know. Your truth is your truth. And I
Mhm.
feel like at the end of the day, he can't dispute what your perception of any of this was, right?
Correct.
I mean, I get that. So, the people that you developed relationships with while
Just because you're 80, does that mean that you're like not aware of what's happening? I mean, she literally acts like 80 is 200 years old. And as far as him having an opinion about the book, he's in the book. So he has every right to share what his thoughts and his experience was regarding this fictionalized recounting of events that Gypsy did in this book.
you were in prison, do you talk to them still?
Fortunately, I can't.
Oh,
While
no.
while I'm on parole, I can't have communication with them, but after I'm off parole, I can.
And how long are you on parole for?
For about another 7 months.
Oh, I thought you were going to say 7 years.
Should have asked about Rachel Garlick, because Rachel Garlick was in prison with Gypsy, and Gypsy utilized Rachel as a way to build her social media platform and then kicked her to the curb. A lot of people that were friendly to Gypsy in prison have come out and said that they completely disagree with everything that she has done. So let's not act as if there was some kind of like kumbaya happening behind bars where Gypsy Rose was well liked or admired.
No, about 7 months to go.
So what does that mean? So when you get released from prison, you go on parole for what was the time frame?
For me, I spent 8.5 years locked up total.
Okay.
And then the remainder of the year and a half on parole.
Okay. And then once you're released from parole, you're done? Do you go on probation or anything like that?
I'm done. Like the sentence is complete.
And then could you move out of state if you wanted to?
I could. Yeah.
Do you have any plans to move out of Louisiana?
I don't know. We've been talking about it.
Yeah, because where is Ken from?
He's originally from Georgia, but he's moved
Oh.
around a lot. So he's lived in Dallas, he's lived in Seattle.
Right.
So he's moved around a lot.
Yeah, and all of those are kind of like, I guess, the South, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just a lot different.
Seattle is in the South. Kailyn, girl, you are really showing your level of stupidity. Not only did you not look into this case, but you're also saying that Seattle is in the South.
This is my first time in Louisiana, so
Oh,
and
welcome.
yeah. Well,
This is not what the weather is like usually.
okay, well, I brought a winter coat because I was like, I didn't know what to expect, and it's 30 degrees back home. So I was like,
Mhm.
what is going on? So in the book, you talk about trying foods for the first time
Mhm.
and having your salivary glands taken out.
Mhm.
What does that even mean? And when you say that you were trying foods for the first time, what were some of the things that you experienced with eating certain foods for the first time?
So, when I say, eating certain foods for the first time, it means that I've never tried it before.
Okay.
So certain foods my mother never let me eat, or the majority of my nutrition came from my feeding tube
Right.
and formula based nutrition.
All the way up until you were how old?
24. I was about, up
Oh,
until
wow.
the prime itself.
I did not realize that. So when you don't have those glands anymore, what does that do for eating food?
So the salivary glands isn't exactly part of why I had the feeding tube.
Okay.
So the salivary glands was taken out after the feeding tube was
Okay.
already placed in. But what your salivary glands do is produce saliva. So if often you'll see me drink, lick my lips, that is often a sign that my mouth is really dry, because without the two salivary glands in my neck, I produce less saliva.
That's so interesting. So when you're eating foods,
Let's do a word count. How many times Kailyn says interesting in this interview? Interesting is a really, basic word, but she overuses it to a degree in this interview that it makes me want to hit my head against the wall. She's allowing Gypsy to put out this info as if all of her salivary glands are gone. Poor little old Gypsy. I would like to confirm, because obviously I'm not a doctor, humans have 3 pairs of major salivary glands and 600 to 1,000 minor salivary glands.
you
I have
need.
to drink a lot.
Did they tell you that was going to be a side effect, or were you too young at that point to understand like what that meant to
I
have?
wasn't told. So I had no idea what the side effects would have been.
That's so interesting. And there's no way to obviously replace them.
No, once they're out, it's taking organs out of you. So you can't regrow them or put them back in.
Do the foods taste the same?
It's taking organs out of you, but you realize that there are many organs that can be replaced. She literally acts as if, people get their kidney removed and can't get a transplant. People get heart transplants.
Otherwise?
I wouldn't know any different, would I?
Right, no, I guess not. And so could you get regular foods like blended and put through your feeding tube, or it was just strictly
that's possible, but it's not recommended.
Okay.
The doctor gives you a specific routine on what you can and cannot put through a feeding tube, or, they don't recommend putting regular food through a feeding tube because it often gets stuck in the feeding tube itself.
That's so interesting. And in the book, you talk about, the correctional facility that you were at. Does the word correctional in the name of a prison mean anything?
I think that it does. I think that the word correction often means to stop or to prevent. And prison definitely does that.
So you think that it's more of like a rehabilitation?
And by the way, you can put blended food into a feeding tube. It's a process called blenderized tube feeding, BTF, and it's possible. So
I think for some, I think it is very much based on what the inmate wants.
Okay.
So if the inmate wants to better him or herself, it will be productive.
Okay.
And if not, then they're just spending wasted time.
Okay. Because I know that there's like...
And what did Gypsy Rose do with her time in prison? Sure, she got her GED. She did not do anything as far as accepting therapy, working through her issues, coming out the other side a better person. She did interviews whenever somebody was willing to interview her. She made sure that she was building up her social media platform, and she made sure that she was preparing to release this book, all of which got her paid.
State prisons or federal prisons, but they don't necessarily always have the word correctional in the name of the...
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
I don't know that for sure, but I've noticed, or at least I think I have, and Alessandra's saying yes, so I'm going with yes. I want to dive headfirst into page 3 of the book. Obviously, I want people to go pick up the book and read it, buy it, all of that, but you used a metaphor where you talk about it was, your throat was going to be cut, or so it was more of like a life or death sort of situation.
Correct.
Can you sort of describe what that meant to you in a way that, people will hopefully want to go buy the book?
I think that, obviously we wanted, and we meaning me and my co-authors, wanted to convey a sense of urgency.
Okay.
Because a lot of people can't put themselves in the mindset of where I was at with the abuse and how desperate I felt. So having a statement like she was going to cut my throat, that statement stands out a lot. And so it transports the readers into my mind and emotion. And so that's why it was so important to kind of say that and then go into the details of what I meant by that.
Right. It sort of paints the whole picture.
Exactly.
Okay, I understand. The book was very well written, and I was really impressed with how thorough it was.
So basically, Gypsy and her co-authors said, let's put out this super scary lie in order to get people's attention so that they continue listening or reading your stupid book. Let's shock them into continuing to consume the book.
There were a couple things, and we'll get to it later on, about about Nick and some of the things that I didn't really know. I don't know if I just didn't follow his story as much, but in the book you said that you were in a silent standoff, right? So your mom was desperate to sort of keep control over you. Looking back, do you still feel the same way?
I do.
Yeah.
I just feel a little bit more humanity towards her now. Because after going through all like the research with family members, I started to learn that she seemed very self-isolated. Um, she was just not.
So now you feel humanity towards her because she's dead. You got your way, and now you have humanity because you did what you wanted and you got out of prison after 8.5 years, and now you're being treated like a celebrity and making a bunch of money. So now you have humanity. I don't buy it.
Someone that had a social life herself. Um, it was very much keep us in a tiny bubble.
Do you think that that was intentional and she was aware of it? Or do you think it was more like she didn't really know that she was doing these things?
I think maybe both.
Okay.
I have feelings about both. So, I mean, I think that it was intentional to not correspond with our family, not correspond with my father. And so I think that that part was intentional, but I don't think that maybe she was aware how that affected me
Okay.
in a negative way.
Okay. So maybe some of the other things that were happening were in relation to, self-isolating, but she wasn't really aware of what she was like, how
Right.
deep this was
Right.
going.
How much it hurts.
Okay, that's interesting too. I actually only ever heard of Munchausen by proxy because of Eminem, right? Like the rapper.
I'm still learning about this.
Yeah.
I have been like someone else brought that up too, and I'm like, I need to dive more into that.
That was my sort of first lesson of what the illness, I guess, is or what.
I still find it to be so unfair that these interviews are just allowing this to slide by. Not Gypsy. Dee Dee was not diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. That was something that Gypsy's legal team came up with during her trial. It was never mentioned before Gypsy Rose was on trial for the murder of her mother. And I find that to be so disgraceful that, okay, this is all we have, so we're just going to hang on to it, and it's going to be mentioned anytime there's an interview because, oh yeah, Dee Dee was big, bad, scary, MVP, blah, 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 but she wasn't diagnosed. And there's a lot of people that might not realize that she wasn't diagnosed, and it was something that was composed by Gypsy's legal team.
And that was the only time I had ever heard of it until your story. And so I think that your story has definitely brought more awareness to it for sure. If you had to guess, how many times do you think that you've been under anesthesia?
Probably over 100, probably.
And do you know what the side effects of that?
Over 100 times. That is one of the most insane lies that I have heard Gypsy tell as of lately. Over 100. The procedures that Gypsy Rose had done, they were required because of her microdeletion. This was not, 100 different doctors that were randomly putting Gypsy under anesthesia. Over 100. Never forget that she said that. Over 100. And do you see how easily she can lie? She just looks at the host and will spout out lies. It's because that is who she is. The little gremlin in her DNA is a liar.
Do you have, I think I've read something about like short-term memory or long-term memory. Do you feel like you feel any side effects, long-term effects from it?
I haven't noticed any so far, which I feel like I'm blessed for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Going under anesthesia, when I was a kid, I didn't ask questions.
Right.
So it's like all the side effects and everything, all the dangers, was told to my mom, not to me.
Right. Right. Because you were a minor. So
Right.
that makes sense. In the book too, you talked about your, I don't want to call it an addiction because I don't necessarily think that you called it an addiction. Do you think that you had an addiction?
I absolutely do think that it was.
So you don't feel comfortable saying that she had an addiction, but you feel comfortable labeling Dee Dee as somebody who was medically abusing Gypsy, even though we know that that's not true, and somebody who had MBP. even though she was falsely diagnosed after her passing. But you want to coddle Gypsy and say, oh, well, you didn't say it was an addiction, so I don't want to say that either.
Addiction to painkillers, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
So by accident, or did you, like, were you already taking them and you felt the effects, and so you eventually, got to a point where you were abusing them, or do you think that it was more by accident?
It was originally my first exposure was from pain medication from after having surgery.
Right.
And so that was accidental. So it started off with, okay, they prescribed me this pain medicine. Oh, it makes me feel different. It makes me feel kind of numb. And so after that point, that's when I slowly started to take more and more and more and slowly abused it.
Okay. And your mom was aware of it, but didn't say anything.
Correct.
Because I think that's what I read in the book, and I was shocked by that.
Correct.
But that sort of fell into subconscious or conscious.
So her mother was aware of it, but Gypsy was stealing her mother's medication. So how does that make any sense? She later says that her and Dee Dee literally had to file a police report for missing narcotics. Most people don't take kindly to their medication being stolen. Just saying, I don't believe a word that Gypsy is saying here.
Plan of, her kind of keeping you close, it sort of helped keep you there, right?
Right.
That's so interesting. I always wonder with addiction, my mom's an addict and an alcoholic, and so I always wonder how sort of that can happen.
It's hard whenever you have someone, there's nobody there to tell you to stop or to pull you away from the edge, but instead encourage. So my mom was on pain medication herself, as well as Xanax. And so she would give me what we call a cocktail. And so that would be a mixture of oxycodone and Xanax together. So.
And what would that do? Would it put?
Wow, a cocktail, as if Dee Dee Blanchard invented this. Gypsy is talking like it's this new thing. We invented it. Do you actually think that people don't know what a cocktail of medication is?
You to sleep or what?
Yes, I mean downers for sure. I've never tried uppers, but I have had downers, and it put me in a state of numbness, and I liked being there.
And so would you spend a lot of time in that state of mind, you think?
Yes.
I know at one point you talked about how you...
Yes, but if it put you to sleep, then how did you like being there? Because you weren't present. You were just sleeping. So if you like sleeping a lot, that's fine, but you're saying that it numbed you. And for me, that means that it numbed you to be able to exist in an environment that you were not happy in, but you were under the influence of this substance. So it numbed you to a point where you could exist and not be miserable, but you're saying that it just put you to sleep. I don't know.
Took the last of your mom's pills, and then you guys had to go file a police report in order to get a refill, because that was the only way that you could get a refill on the narcotics.
Correct.
When you think about that now, how do you feel?
I mean, I definitely feel a lot of regrets, because that's, not behavior that I would ever condone or am proud of. But it does put it in perspective as to like what mind frame I was in.
Yeah. I mean, I just, but as a mom, you're about to be a mom.
Yes.
So it's like, could you even imagine like helping yourself and your daughter do something like that?
No, I would never. Like, I can't imagine. Like,
I would be so curious to know, if she was here today, like where her mind was at in that moment. Because did she need them at that point, or do you think
she did need them?
And I will say, with the way that Gypsy is presenting in this interview, that blazer jacket that she has on is buttoned. And I don't know, tell me if I'm crazy down below. I feel like at 8 months pregnant, a button blazer wouldn't really make sense. But I don't know. One day her belly looks big and the other day it's non-existent. It's very confusing. And also I want to add in, the thing that a lot of people forget is that if There were 100 times that Gypsy was under anesthesia, and all of these doctors were doing all of this shady stuff and, all of this. There would be at least one doctor that could have been approached for medical malpractice. At least one. And there has been zero.
We were in a car accident in
Mhm.
2001, and it left her with an injured leg.
Okay.
And her leg had never healed back fully.
Right.
So she still had like the pins and screws and plates and hardware to kind of keep her leg in place. Um, and she suffered from daily pain. Um, I won't say that she abused them.
That was my next question.
She
Okay.
didn't abuse them. I think she took them as prescribed. So.
Okay. I think, and I don't know this for sure. I'm not an expert, but I would guess that it probably has a different effect on you as a child. You were young and you didn't necessarily need them.
Correct.
So it's going to have a different effect than someone who's actually using them as needed.
Correct. And dosage makes a big difference.
Right.
So I was around 90 pounds.
Oh, wow.
95 pounds.
And so she was probably double
Mhm.
your height and weight,
Right.
or, whatever. So that's
dosage does make a difference.
in the book, I was shocked to find out that Christy and Dee Dee knew each other
Yes.
before your dad and Christy were together.
Before they get into the homewrecker section of this podcast, I'd like to just go down this list of the procedures that Gypsy Rose did have done, because to sit there and say that you were under anesthesia over 100 times and for Kailyn to allow it to slide, this would have taken 5 seconds of research, and she would have been able to do what a true interviewer does and refute what Gypsy was trying to lie about in that situation. Feeding tube installation, ear tube surgery to control supposed chronic ear infections, Botox injections in her salivary glands to control supposed drooling problem. When the Botox was deemed insufficient, 2 of her salivary glands were surgically removed. Multiple operations on her eye muscles to treat their alleged weakness, muscle biopsy to find out why her legs didn't work, multiple teeth extractions due to decayed teeth, likely from anti-seizure medication, a surgery to make her not vomit anymore, and that is not confirmed. So we're talking about a handful of procedures being done. I don't know where being under anesthesia over 100 times comes from. We've always known that it was a very short list of procedures, and now we're talking about anesthesia over 100 times. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yes, Laura, Christy, and my mom all knew each other.
That is so interesting. So
It's crazy.
was that a point of contention? I believe I read in the book that it was a point of contention. Dee Dee felt like Christy sort of took her place and was with your dad. Is that right?
Correct.
I am just, so your dad and Christy actually grew up together.
Yeah, they met in high school, and
Okay.
so it was a small town.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of like everybody knows everybody. So yeah, they kind of grew up together and went to school together and stuff like this. So they were always friends. And when my dad started dating my mom, Christy was still just a friend. But my mom always felt like there was maybe something more, and that jealousy kind of grew from there, and there was always contention between the two.
Did you know that before writing the book, or did you?
I knew that from
You did?
I did know that because often my mom would say really mean things about Christy
Okay.
to me growing up. So yeah,
you
and
had
I
the-
knew that they did not, or at least I knew that my mom didn't like Christy. So
Has Christy ever expressed that she didn't like your mom?
no, like she was very civil. She's like, I thought that your
Dee Dee had intuition, and I think Dee Dee's intuition also is reflected in some of the ways that she handled Gypsy. I'm not saying I agree with it all. There's always that saying, like, a mother's instinct, a mother's intuition, and I think that she saw issues with Gypsy and tried to correct her and, not have a wild child on her hands. And Gypsy did not respond well to that, and she did things her way. But I think it's funny how she talks so highly about Christy. Christy is always the saint. Oh, she didn't have anything bad to say. I don't believe it.
Mom was a nice woman. Um, it wasn't until after I started dating your dad that there was this back and forth tension.
Yeah. That is so interesting. Did have your feelings changed at all? Like, did you not like Christy growing up because of what your mom said?
Exactly. So, I mean,
Okay.
growing up, my mom always used to tell me that Christy was like the home wrecker.
Mm.
She's the other woman. Like,
Hmm.
she was always branded the other woman.
Right. So she didn't have her own identity. So you
Correct.
sort of took on what your mom felt, which I mean, when you're young and you only have the one parent in
Mhm.
your life, what are you supposed to know?
Exactly.
You're just going by what you're taught.
Yeah.
Um, in the book, you talk about a half sister, but it wasn't clear if that.
By the way, going back to the narcotics thing, I also want to say that there were no narcotics found in Gypsy's system. And there was nothing found in Dee Dee's system either. So supposedly you were taking them, but they weren't in your system and they weren't in Dee Dee's system. So where did they go?
That was Mia, or if there's another half
I
sister.
have two half sisters.
So you have Mia, that is Christy and Rod's,
Hmm.
and then you have another half sister.
Yes.
And do you have a relationship with her?
We are friends on Facebook.
Okay.
So we communicate through Facebook. We have met once
Okay.
earlier in the year.
Okay.
We all got together and, it was great to have, like, my dad had been wanting a relationship with all three of his daughters.
Okay.
And so one day when I was in town, my sister Facebooked me and she's like,
Rod, I just want to say, Rod Blanchard is messy mess. Like, he is messy mess. And it's no wonder that Gypsy thinks that her current behavior post prison is not that big of a deal. And she's just chasing love and going after what her heart desires. When you find out what kind of guy Rod Blanchard is.
like to meet you. And so it was great because I had me, Mia, and her there.
Right.
It was great.
And so has your dad maintained a relationship with her, or she's kind of been separate from everybody?
She's I would say she keeps her distance in a way that she has a family. She has a son.
Sure.
So I think all of the media stuff really just kind of puts her in a protective mode, which
Right.
is understandable.
For sure. And so your dad was sort of like, I mean, he's pretty good looking. He's pretty good looking.
Everybody says that.
So I can see why. I understand how all of this has transpired. But so do you think that they'll have a closer relationship moving forward? Do you think
They're
they'll have
trying.
Yeah?
They're in the work.
So Kailyn is saying that because he's good looking, that somehow makes it make sense that he has 3 kids by different women. Is that the thing that we're saying here? Like, oh, if you're a good looking person, then it's normal to have multiple children with multiple different people. That's sad for the kids because it's always the kids that end up in broken homes and having to deal with the fallout of not having their parents present.
Yeah. No, it's tough because I think once you grow up a certain way and you live in, a certain lifestyle, or you live in maybe is she in Louisiana as well?
She is, yeah.
So even if you're in a different area, I think it's really hard. I met my sister as an adult as well. And I feel like I love her, right? Like that's my sister. But I think sometimes once you're an adult, it is so hard to sort of create those relationships. And, sometimes it works.
Or it could be just that she doesn't want anything to do with Gypsy Rose because she doesn't like her. Just because you're half sisters doesn't mean that you have to, want to be present in this person's life.
And sometimes it doesn't, but I hope that you guys are able to have like a further relationship. Yeah. Have you ever talked to your dad about why he was willing to marry your mom because it was the right thing to do? But I don't think in the book you mentioned him maybe putting the same efforts into that sister. Like, did he just never really have a relationship with her mom?
Well, it was, we're actually very close in age.
Oh, okay.
So
I don't appreciate Kail trying to dig into this other sibling's kind of timeline in history without her being present. I think this is tacky. Focus on Gypsy Rose. Like, who cares? I mean, honestly, like, who cares about her siblings and the whatever? Like, she asked the wrong questions. She didn't do enough research. Let's go. Let's just get through this.
Like really close,
Yeah.
only by a couple months.
Okay, so he had to sort of choose between the two.
Yes.
Okay, he's a
So,
player. I
yeah.
get it. I get it.
He's got 3 baby mamas.
I mean, I have 4 baby dads, so it's fine.
So, I mean, he was 17 years old
Yeah.
when my mom got pregnant.
Okay.
So he would have been, roughly around the same 17 or 18 when my other sister's mom got pregnant as well.
Okay.
So it was one of those things that he was so young.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to do the right thing.
Right.
He's paying child support on one kid.
Right.
Now has to pay child support on another
2.
kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I just chalk it up to like he wasn't ready to be a dad. And yeah, we had those conversations since I've been released.
Yeah.
And he's been very open and honest with me. And he's like,
You talk about how close you and your mom were. You were talking about the nicknames that you guys went by, Baby and Honey, right?
Mhm.
And talking about bathing and sleeping together. Did you ever feel like the relationship was an enmeshment?
it was. I really felt that way. I also like when I was little.
Now, one thing I will say, y'all already know how I feel about Gypsy. I don't like her. If this is true, what she's saying, how she and Dee Dee would bathe together, sleep together, all these things, that is severely disturbing. And that is so inappropriate when these things were happening when Gypsy was a, teenager, young adult. Like, I get it. There's a lot of times like co-sleeping with young children, and I understand that. The bathing thing is very dark and disturbing to me, and I will not just slide by that and not acknowledge that it is grim and very creepy. If true, and again, unfortunately, I don't believe what Gypsy says. I think she lies a lot. I think she's constantly fabricating new lies in order to keep people interested, keep people talking, keep people intrigued in this nonsense fictional circus that she is producing. But if true, that is very dark and very weird.
My mom was like my best friend.
Yeah.
And that's what I chalked it up to. I didn't go to school.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up around other kids was very rare. There may have been the neighborhood kids, my cousins, but few and far between interaction with
Right.
kids my age. And so when I was little, my stuffed animals, my Barbie dolls, my mom was my
Social
everything,
life.
my
Yeah.
social life.
Yeah.
So
Every single time Gypsy Rose has an opportunity to say how awful and unfair and scary her childhood was, she's always talking about, oh, well, I didn't get anything as a child. I didn't get to do all the fun things that other kids did. But then we also hear things like my Barbie dolls and trips to Disney and, playing make-believe and having an imagination. But then you want to say that you didn't have anything in your childhood, and you want to make sure that doesn't happen with your own daughter.
that's what I grew up knowing. And then as I got older, I felt it was almost like being sheltered, but
Mhm.
also taking the part of a partner or spouse in a marriage. So all of her stress would be shared to me.
Right.
And I was kind of expected to carry all of this and be that person that she needed me to be.
Right. So you were the daughter, the friend, the partner,
Everything.
all
Yeah.
of the things
Yeah.
from a really, really young age.
Yeah, it's like having a bad marriage without the sexual part of it.
And how do you feel about that now? Do you feel like you'll know sort of where the boundaries are for your daughter when she's born?
Absolutely. Like I feel like I don't think there's anything wrong with a close relationship with your parent or your daughter.
Right.
But there's a line
Yeah.
between normal and weird.
Yeah, yeah. I have a hard time. I have a 15-year-old, and then I have 7 kids all the way down to the age of 1. And so I have a really hard time with
I'm gonna cut out this little section where Kail talks about like her own kids and parenting and stuff. Like, nobody cares. Obviously, you need to parent your kid and not be their best friend, but you should also be somebody that they can confide in and feel safe around. So that's a very complex conversation, but it's not really related to what Gypsy is sharing. So I will cut just a minute or so out.
in the book you talk about your baby bottles. And
Mhm.
I don't think that I ever heard that in like the headlines or the shows or the documentaries. Is that something that is exclusive to this book?
It is. It's not something that I really.
When Gypsy says that something is exclusive to this book, for me, that just means that it's a new lie that she fabricated in order to get people to drop their jaw and be shocked and surprised. I don't believe this baby bottle thing. Like, me personally, you know, she might have just kept this as a secret, but I don't think that there's any reason that she would have not shared this in a prior interview if it was that much a part of her life. Something that was in her life every single day. I don't think that that would have been kept secret. And I think that it's just a new lie to get people to be like, oh my God, baby bottles, so wild and crazy.
Tell everybody or talk
Right.
about, because I mean that's pretty embarrassing.
Yeah.
So
Are you comfortable talking about it now?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's in the books.
Okay. Definitely go get a copy of this book, My Time to Stand. And so in the book, you talk about having a baby bottle, and up until the night of the crime,
Mhm.
you were packing a baby bottle in your
Correct.
bag.
Correct.
What was that about? Can you talk about it?
Well, my mom never weaned me off the baby bottle.
Like, we're
Um,
talking a bottle with nipples because you
yes,
talk
like
about
a
bringing
baby
change.
bottle.
Yes.
Yes. So, I was given formula through the feeding tube,
Hmm.
but also my comfort. I never like took to a stuffed animal or a blankie or anything, but I loved the
But you had stuffed animals and Barbie dolls that you were playing with, but now you weren't playing with them. You weren't entertained by them. You were entertained by a baby bottle.
bottle.
Okay.
And so, like strawberry Pediasure was my favorite.
Hmm.
And my mom never said, "Oh, you're too old for that."
Okay.
She just let me continue on the bottle.
Sure.
To the point where I think that that's why my teeth, were buck teeth. My original teeth were bucked and just out of alignment.
Sure.
Um, but even up until the night before the crime, I was still very much like that was my source of comfort, you know? So it's like I'm addicted to narcotics and I'm also sucking on a baby bottle to give me comfort.
That is so.
But they weren't found in your system. So, like, I don't know. Did she not take them when her and Nick were on the run? Why was she not in severe withdrawals when she was arrested if she didn't have them in her system? For me, the pills thing and the baby bottle thing, I don't know. Like, I don't believe the baby bottle thing, and I am on the fence about this narcotic thing because it just doesn't make sense when you know that they weren't in her system. And maybe she'll say, oh, well, I went off cold turkey after the crime, but I don't know. The one thing I will say is it says here that it is detectable for up to 4 days. So the only way that she can get out of that is if she says, well, I wasn't taking them when we left the house after the crime.
Hard for me to wrap my head around. How do you feel about that when you think about it?
It's very bizarre. It's very bizarre now looking back on it.
But in
But that was my normal.
right, so in the during that time, you
Mhm.
didn't know any different.
No, like that was my normal.
What is people's reaction similar to mine, where it's just like you truly are addicted to narcotics and drinking out of baby bottle?
Yeah, it's two ends of a spectrum, and somehow I landed right between them.
And then the night of the crime happens, and then you couldn't take the baby bottle to prison.
Right, no.
So what was that like? Was it sort of like a cold turkey cut off the bottle sort of deal?
Correct. Like, I had taken the narcotics.
Hmm.
I didn't pack a baby bottle. I just kind of left my old life behind entirely.
So in some ways that had to be liberating.
It was liberating.
Okay, so she just said she did take them with her. So that means she was taking them when she was on the run. So why were they not in her system?
But also scary. It was new territory. Like for me, when I'm trying something new or I'm entering into a zone that I've never experienced before, I get a lot of anxiety about it.
Yeah. I mean, rightfully so. I feel like your entire life had to be built.
Wow, you don't say. You're going to try something new and you feel anxious about it. Do you think that you are alone on that? That's like common sense. A lot of people get anxious if they're trying something new. Let's focus on the fact that you're sitting here claiming that you're an addict sucking on baby bottles, but you did not have anything in your system and they did not find anything on your person.
Off of anxiety.
Hmm.
I cannot imagine. So CPS comes just one time in
Just one time.
your entire life.
Entire life.
I don't even have words because I've seen CPS get involved in situations for much, much less
Hmm.
and either do something or don't. And so when you look back, I mean, at the time, did it even cross your mind to tell CPS what was going on?
I didn't even know who they were. So I want to make it clear that when I grew up, like, okay, so most parents, to kind of discipline their children, they're like, oh, the boogeyman's going to get you.
Right.
Okay. So my mom never said the boogeyman. My mom said the state. So I grew up being afraid of people that I thought were bad people
Right.
that were going to take me away from her. And they were called the state. And so,
Never once heard her say that. Again, this is something else. Oh, the state, the boogeyman, blah, blah, blah. She was not a child when CPS came to visit. She was not a child. She was not a child that was scared. Oh, and then she goes on to blame CPS by not asking her. They weren't asking her the right questions. This is always the thing. It's always someone else's fault with Gypsy. She'll be like, oh, well, I did this really bad thing, but this is the reason. Oh, I did that, but this person did that. Like, it's never taking true accountability for her and her alone.
what I didn't know back then was she was telling me to be afraid of CPS. And I didn't know that then. It wasn't until after I got out of prison that I kind of figured it all out.
Right, right.
And so when they came, I didn't know who they were. I'm like, do they work with the police? And they're asking me questions like, do I have bruises on my arms and legs?
Right. And did you?
I didn't. I didn't at that point in time. I didn't. However, they weren't asking me the right questions, and that is kind of like where I fell through. That's kind of like where I put a lot of like guilt on me.
Mm-hmm.
Is because I'm like, well, why didn't I just tell them this?
Well, you were a kid. You didn't know any different. And you were also told to be basically taught to be afraid of them.
Exactly. So I'm like, even though at this point I would have been a teenager,
Right.
but having the mindset of someone much younger because I was sheltered.
18. She was like 17 or 18. So let's not act like you were barely a teenager. You were basically an adult. Might not have been thinking like an adult, but let's stop with this. Oh, I was so young. I was so meek. I was so afraid and scared and blah, blah. Gypsy Rose wants people to forget that she was a whole like 23 or 24 years old when she was playing along at Disney, eating her royal mashed potatoes and that whole shtick. A whole ass adult who was doing that while planning the murder of her mother, but was yet supposedly addicted to painkillers, but able to plan a murder and groom Nicholas Godejean for 2 years to do it for her.
To be that way.
And also believed to be that.
Yes.
I think it was what, 4 years?
Yeah.
How old are you today?
I am 33.
33.
Yes.
And you would have thought that you were what, I guess 29, right? Like if this still
Correct.
continued.
It was always like every year of an advancement was like 2 years knocked back down.
Okay.
So it was progressive.
Right.
It wasn't, when I was 10, she would say I was 9, so it started with the 1 year and then 2 year, and then it just progressed to more years
Okay.
as I got older.
Because it's easier to kind of hide the years as you get
Mhm.
older, right?
Mhm.
Like you could pass for 29, sitting
Mhm.
in front of me today. And so that makes sense. I can't understand how when you were talking about in the book, you were talking about the medical records and the name spellings were off and then
Mhm.
the dates of birth were changed
Right.
and those all sort of slipped through the
Mhm.
cracks too.
Mhm. And it's really shocking to me because even in certain medical records, there is descriptions of certain illnesses. So my mother described me as paralyzed from the waist down, but in certain transcripts there is quadriplegic,
Hmm.
paraplegic. So it is. I'm like, there's a difference in the two. So if you're a doctor, my eyes would be looking at that and automatically want to correct what's wrong. So it's like the medical records are basically scattered to the wind in inaccuracy, and it's so hard to piece together any sort of sense.
Well, she's going doctor to doctor.
Doctor to doctor. Yeah.
Maybe some of the files are not going with her, right?
Correct. I She did not transfer
Hmm.
them to one hospital to another.
Right.
So when the new doctor would ask for old records, she would claim that they were all, washed away in Hurricane Katrina because back in 2005, there was still that transfer from hard copy
Yep.
records to computer
Even
digital.
now, I think that they
So,
still struggle with that,
yeah.
right? Like I moved from Pennsylvania to Delaware and, my doctors were asking for records and I was like, I don't have those.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's sort of easy to
Yeah.
lose the paper
Lose them.
trail. So your mom would drug herself to sleep sometimes,
She was
whether
prescribed Ambien.
right, right, right. So not abusing it
Right.
necessarily.
Not abusing it. No.
Kailyn literally just said she would drug herself to sleep. She would drug herself to sleep. The way that Kailyn Lowry talks about Dee Dee in this interview is so unprofessional and distasteful. There is a way to have a discussion about somebody that should be called out for the things that they did. And then there's a way to just completely slander and embarrass and improperly diagnose somebody that is not here. And as an interviewer, I realize that it might not be easy to walk that line, but you shouldn't be doing a podcast where you interview people if you're not able to at least attempt to walk on that line.
When she would go to sleep, I know that in parts of the book you talked about still being in your wheelchair, but
Mhm.
were there ever times that you did get out of your wheelchair and walk while she was asleep?
There would be times. So, like, if she had to go run an errand, there was times as I got older
Right.
that I did.
Dude, I don't believe for a second that Gypsy used that wheelchair when she was in the house. And I think that Dee Dee knew she wasn't using it. There was so much stuff in that house. It was like similar like a hoarding situation. There was so much junk. Where is the wheelchair going to go? There's no room to move around. So, in my opinion, I believe that Gypsy Rose was fully walking around in that house. Dee Dee knew it, and the wheelchair was brought out when they were leaving the home to go to a store or go to a medical facility. That's when it was used. I don't for a second believe that Dee Dee made her use the wheelchair when they were at home. And this whole, oh, I would dance and I would get out of my wheelchair, I think it's bullshit.
Did want to stretch my legs and get out of the wheelchair. And so, some of the most freeing times that I had was I would play CDs on the boom box and
Hmm.
just dance.
Yeah.
That was my freedom.
Did she
But it
know
was
that you were doing that?
she didn't. She did not, because I would be in trouble for walking even inside the house.
Oh, wow. So then did you lose muscle mass in your legs because you were in the wheelchair so much or no?
And I didn't lose muscle mass.
No.
No, because I still like.
That's because, in my opinion, she wasn't using the wheelchair at all when they were at home. I think the wheelchair was a prop in their money, money making scheme.
every once in a while I would move my legs here and there, not meaning to, but she would have to correct me and be like, "Stop moving your legs."
At what point did you realize that you were not actually needing the wheelchair? Like, how old do you think you were?
I mean, I always knew that I could walk, and I've always been honest about that. But it was, and goes right into the title. This is why I wanted to have the word "stand" in the title, is because yes, I knew that I could walk. However, my mom didn't let me get out of the chair. So it was like I was forced to be in the chair.
That is so wild. I can't imagine. And it has to be, obviously, don't want to speak ill of the dead, right? But like that has to be mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
As a mom, I can't imagine, doing these things to to my own
Right.
child, let alone any child. But
Yeah.
there has to be something deeper there. And I wish that we had more answers as far as that goes.
Absolutely. That's where I feel like, maybe in a sense the system failed her.
Yeah.
And the way we grew up in southern Louisiana, particularly in my family, we don't talk about mental health.
Right.
Growing up in the 90s, it wasn't.
I really don't like how Dee Dee is dead. I really don't like how Kailyn is sitting here diagnosing a victim of a violent crime who's not here and was not diagnosed. And you're allowing the person that unalived her to join in this conversation of speculations and lies.
Really talked about.
Right.
You're either labeled weird or just different or
Crazy.
crazy. Like
Mhm.
those are the terms that you grew up with in the 90s.
Right.
And sadly, she would have needed therapy.
She didn't get those things because you killed her. She didn't get those things because you took things into your own hands because you wanted to be doing whatever you wanted to do, and you decided to kill her. But the most important thing is you used a disabled man to carry out the crime.
She would have needed medication. But she didn't get those things.
Right. Right. She couldn't have because nobody was willing to. It's always you're crazy. And
Yeah.
I think that raising awareness about it now is also, I mean, we talk about mental health all the time, right? Like in where we are today in life, I
Right.
feel like we talk.
And how about the mental health of this little gremlin that's sitting across the table from you, Kail? How about her and her mental health and how crazy you have to be to literally do what she did?
So you meet Dan, and you still drank from a bottle at this time, and you
Mhm.
pack the bottle to go to Dan's house. Did he already know this?
He didn't know. I didn't tell him a lot. I didn't tell him I had a feeding tube. I didn't tell him about necessarily how weird my life was and how different it was. There was certain things that came up in conversation.
Again, I think that the baby bottle thing is a complete fabrication. I think it's something new that she came up with, and that's why Dan mysteriously didn't know about it.
Conversations like I could walk. And obviously because I ran away that night.
Yeah.
But he was oblivious to a lot of what was going on.
And Dan was an adult that you met at a convention,
Correct.
and you guys had a romantic interest in each other?
I mean, I had a crush on him.
Right.
And I think he thought that I was cute, but it wasn't to the point where it was a relationship.
Okay. But you guys maybe had a little bit of an
Yeah, I
interest, a
was like,
fling.
he's cute.
How old is he? How old was he?
He was 36,
And he thought you were how old?
15 at the time.
So that would be a pedophile, right?
I don't like saying that word. I don't like
That would be,
labeling someone anything.
I don't like saying that word. Gypsy told him that she was older than she actually was. So, again, more lies.
I don't like
Okay.
labels put on me, so that's why I don't put labels on
Okay.
other people.
Fair.
That's all I'm
Okay.
saying.
But it's questionable.
We're going to put labels on you. We're going to put tons of labels on you because of who you are and your lack of character and exactly what you have shown us. So you're going to be labeled. You might as well embrace it.
It's definitely questionable behavior. So your mom threatened to, or she did actually like out him as, someone who liked children.
Correct. So, once my mom brought me back home after running away and catching me with Dan, that's whenever she started to like call the people that like knew about it in a very vague way.
Okay.
And so she claimed that Dan kidnapped me, that he took me to somewhere, and that like I was safe, I was found. Um, w- all the while I was chained to a bed at this time. So she's
Because you ran to Dan's.
because I ran to Dan's.
And have you had communications with Dan since?
No.
Never. He's never reached out to make sure you were good and okay.
No, we had a text exchange
Mhm.
like the day that I got arrested. And he had texted me and he's like, "Everybody says you're missing. Are you okay?"
That was the text.
That was the text. And I never had any communication since.
Wow. He was because he was scared. He was on parole, right? You found out that or house arrest?
It wasn't house arrest. I think I found out that it was like probation,
Probation.
parole,
Okay. And then
probation, parole,
he would have gotten in trouble probably for talking to you at that point.
probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Was this to Dan's where you ask the neighbor, or is this the second time that you run away, that you get to the neighborhood and you knock on somebody random's door?
That was the first time. So,
So-
that was with Dan. Yeah.
Okay.
That was,
So he's in the
yeah.
hospital. Okay. So you just knock on some random person's door?
I did. So it was
So she can knock on some random person's door and wear a blonde wig and, be looking all crazy to go ask for a ride to the hospital to go see Dan. But she could not go to that person's house and say, "I desperately need your help. I am being severely mistreated by my mother and I need the police. I need help."
the housing community that was right on the side of the Habitat for Humanity community.
Okay.
So it was literally up the street.
Okay.
And I knock on the first person's door that I see.
And you're like, my
I'm like, I called him my boyfriend.
Yeah.
And I was like, "My boyfriend is in the hospital. Can I get a ride?"
they didn't know who you were?
They didn't know who I was, but I wore a long blonde wig. I still remember what I was wearing. I had a long blonde wig. I had a oversized, like an too big of a red bra. It was like two sizes too big. A black tank top, jeans that were too big, and a Harry Potter hoodie.
Did they think you were on drugs?
I probably looked like I was.
Like, what did they say to you?
They're like, "Okay." I mean, it was a nice man. It was probably like 2 o'clock in the morning, and he gave me the ride. But
He took you?
yes,
And then you get to the hospital and you're like, "Hey Dan, what's up?"
yeah,
And y'all just hung
But-
out in the hospital.
yeah. Well, he was released within 20 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And so his cousin was there with him. And
Right.
so his cousin had drove us back to the friend's house that he was staying at.
Okay. And they also didn't know who you were, like what
They
your
were
story was.
asleep when
Okay.
we got there. It wasn't until the morning where the man, the husband, comes in the room and asks me my name.
hmm
And stupid as all I can be, I'm like, "Gypsy, I'm Dan's girlfriend."
Oh my
I'm
God.
so stupid.
Yeah. And then he's like, "Your mom's here."
Yeah, an hour
She really thinks the stupidest things are hilarious. I thank God this is almost over.
later, your mom's here.
And you were convinced that she was going to let you continue to have a
She
friendship with Dan.
She did. She's like, "If you come back with me, I'll let you have a friendship with him. I'll let you see him. I'll let you talk to him. Just come back with me." And I believed her, and I went back with her.
And then at that point, that's before the shed incident.
Correct.
Okay. So the second attempt to escape was in 2012.
hmm
And what was the mindset at this time? You're like, "I already had a failed escape." You
Mm-hmm.
go back home with your mom. She tells you you can have Dan as a friend, but you were like, "No, I need to escape still." Because
Mhm.
she changed you to the bed
That was
between incidents.
yes. So I mean, that was definitely like a cracking point. Is that I never submitted, I guess you can say, fully to the idea that this was going to be my life.
So did that first attempt give you almost like a hope that you're like, "Okay, I didn't do this right the first time. I could do it the second time."
Exactly. I'm like, okay, well, maybe if I make certain differences. So, I pack a bag in the middle of the night. I'm going to attempt to.
I want to talk about the chains, being chained to the bed, whatever. We all know this, but there were no chains, handcuffs, nothing like that found in the Blanchard home. So is Gypsy going to say, oh, well, the chains were thrown away? I don't believe that. Um, Again, I think the chains and the baby bottle thing and all of that, it's just part of this wild story that she has fabricated. And, she also had claimed that Dee Dee smashed up her laptop, but we never saw evidence of that.
Leave to just go anywhere because at that point I hadn't texted with Dan, so I had no idea where he was.
Okay.
But I was just gonna run
And just see where,
and see where I was gonna be homeless. I didn't care what I had to do. I was just gonna go.
but that one failed as well.
It failed as well. She found my backpack. And that's whenever there was a standoff, and that's whenever I shot her with the BB gun.
Okay. So that is actually the next question I have
Mhm.
is why did your mom have the BB gun to begin with? Why did she buy that from Walmart?
So she had bought that because she had told me it was to keep Dan away.
Two things. I don't think that Dee Dee bought that to keep Dan away. I think that Dee Dee probably bought that because it's her and Gypsy living alone, and she, didn't have anything else to even try to warn off somebody if they were to try to break into her home. I don't think that Gypsy knew that it was BB. I think that she thought that it was the real thing. And the reason that I think that is because why on earth would you literally shoot at your parent as a way to scare them when you are supposedly being severely abused by this person? You probably wouldn't want to upset them, but you might want to end it all. So for me, the whole, oh, I knew it was a BB thing, I don't believe it. I just don't.
In certain documentaries and transcripts and stuff like that, some people are like, "Oh, well, she didn't know it was a BB gun." No, I knew it was a BB gun.
Okay.
So
So you didn't think it was going to kill her or anything?
no, no.
Okay. And when you shot her with it, it was to scare her or did you think it would kill her?
Oh no, it was just a scare.
Okay. Okay. Did you get out of the
So just to scare the person that is severely abusing me, I'm going to literally point this at them just to scare them, even though they are in a position where they're chaining me to the bed and being big, bad, and scary. But I'm going to do this to scare them. And she claims that she did all this from the wheelchair, and Kailyn, wants to act like that's cool. Please.
wheelchair to shoot her with the BB gun?
I didn't. I stayed in the wheelchair the whole time.
What is the state of the frame of mind for that? Like I guess
have no idea. It's when you are in a state of being so afraid, logic goes out the window.
right.
So I may have touched on this in the book where